just live life and take the opportunities when they're presented.
Josephine Claus came to Austria as a U.S. teaching assistant for the 2019-20 program year. During her time as a USTA, she taught English at the Bundeshandelsakademie in Linz, Austria. We recently met with her to discuss her experience, the lessons she learned, and how her time as a USTA in Austria has influenced her life trajectory in the time since then.
Well, I was in the first year of my master's program at California State University, Long Beach, and my mentor professor, Dr. Jeffrey L. High, suggested that maybe that might be a program I was interested in. And then I looked at it and I said, I'm absolutely interested in that. So I applied. I was in the first year of my master's program, and I was already familiar with doing lesson plans and following a syllabus and whatnot, and I was very comfortable in front of a classroom. In fact, I would get noise complaints because I was too comfortable in front of the classroom. But we had a lot of fun. So I was ready to go, and I found it a little bit more freeing to do the structure that the USTA program had for the lessons. So it was fun. So I taught at a Bundeshandelsakademie, and I had the privilege of teaching a night class to some students that were about 18 to 24 years old, and the topic was radio. And unbeknownst to these students, I actually had a radio show during my undergraduate degree at Portland State University. So I knew how that structure worked. And the previous lesson had been about advertising. So I took what we knew about advertising and I said, okay, we're going to pretend that I'm the radio show host and you guys are the advertisements. So they had 30 minutes to make these advertisements for whatever goofy product they came up with. And I said, okay, so when I'm going to point at each of you, you are going to start your advertisement and we're just going to go with it. So I did the intro and I said, now let's hear a word from our sponsors. And I pointed at each group and it was phenomenal. We had so much fun. And then at the end, we all clapped for ourselves. We were that proud of ourselves. But it was fun because we got to use something that I was familiar with, and then they got to use whatever English skills they wanted, and we made something really creative. And I think that was what made it so memorable and fun. So I'm going to mention two because these both are pretty big. I'd say Christmas time in Austria, 100% would recommend. I loved it. The night markets were great. And then I actually went over to one of the family houses that I'd met, and they made a really beautiful Christmas dinner. And just the overall environment of it, like actually for one of the night markets, I went with that same class that I did the radio show. We decided to go to the night market for class and speak in English. That was a lot of fun. But then my other most memorable one was I was actually teaching in Austria when COVID hit. So I remember all of us going into the teacher's room and everybody was just like, oh, they're going to shut it down. And I was telling everybody, you guys are being dramatic. Okay, they're not going to shut everything down. We're not going into quarantine. And then the principal's like, yeah, we got to shut everything down. We're going into quarantine. And then I went, oh my God, I'm not taking this seriously enough. But I just totally... but I actually, that was a very important time for me as a person. I learned a lot about myself in quarantine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything, which I know kind of sounds weird because it was horrific, but you make do with what you have. So both very memorable experiences, Christmas and quarantine. There you go. I learned that the Austrians are very authentic and they can also be very kind. So that's something I take with me. So when I say authentic and kind isn't necessarily being nice to someone. It's helping them no matter how you're feeling. So maybe you're super happy to help someone, but you could also be super annoyed to help someone. but you still help them. And that's what's important. And they're very real about it. They're just straight up, this is how I feel, but you asked me for help, so I'm going to help you. And that's something that I try to take with me wherever I go, because that's real and that's something that people appreciate. And I still think of a lot of experiences where somebody was very direct with me, but they still helped me. And I hope to embody that. I have thought about this, and my answer to this is no. Because anything that I might think of saying might be along the lines of, oh, I wish they'd told me how much culture shock. I wish they'd told me how different this might be. Well, I was fairly, I was very warned about this. I was very prepared. But also, the thing that's so beautiful about culture shock is that everybody goes through it differently, and it lasts a different amount of time for everyone, which is again something I was told. But another thing that I found shocking, which, I mean, yeah, it was just shocking, was when I saw all of my fellow TAs and I realized we were all very different as well, which was very beautiful. But that was a shock. So, yeah. Well, I was able to finish my master's degree, and then I worked for a German artist's residency in Southern California known as the Villa Aurora and the Thomas Mann House. So I actually got to work with artists sponsored by the German government. And then after I did that, I taught for a year in South Korea. So I was inspired to actually apply for my teaching job in South Korea because I knew that I could do it because of my experience here in Austria. So Austria, I'd say, built my confidence and taught me to take opportunities once they are presented to you. My first piece of advice would be seize the day and take the opportunity once it's presented to you. You never know where it's going to take you, and life is kind of wacky. So you just kind of got to go with it. But then the next piece of advice that I would give to any of the program participants is absolutely make friends, and not just with your fellow teaching assistants, but with any of the Austrians that you run into. I actually still keep in contact with many of my friends from Austria. And a way that you could do this is find some sort of common ground, because initially you might feel like, oh, I'm a little bit too different. I'm an American or American, let's say English speaker in a foreign country, because not everybody's American in the program, which is beautiful. But find some sort of commonality, like, do you have a favorite sports team or just a sports game? I'm not a sports person, but I saw a lot of people do this. Or do you have a favorite hangout spot? Or do you attend the same church? But find some common ground and show that you're willing to learn about them, and they'll reciprocate tenfold. And the last piece of advice that I would say is make the best out of any situation. I was in Austria during quarantine. That could have been absolutely horrendous, but I found it quite lovely, actually. I had time to think about what I actually wanted and to experiment with different things that I wanted to do. Like, I sat down and I would help work on my German, or I even started teaching myself Japanese, or I would write, or I would read, or I would draw, all sorts of different things. Or sometimes I would just jump around the apartment and have a dance party, and it was great. So just live life and take the opportunities when they're presented.